All right, well, welcome everybody. Welcome to back to the noon lecture series for 2024-2025. And happy Mid-Autumn Festival, everyone. 中秋节快乐. My name is Ann Lin. I'm currently on leave from being the director of the Lieberthal-Rogel Center for Chinese Studies. On behalf of our acting director, Joseph Lam, I am delighted to welcome you to our first presentation for fall 2024. And I'm really grateful and honored to be asked to introduce our speaker today. The complete series schedule is available on the table where you entered, and it's on the China Center's website. And of course, if you are on our list, we will send you email reminders weekly. So if you would like, please make sure that Ina knows to put you on our email list. Before I introduce today's speaker, two announcements. First, the Lieberthal-Rogel Center for Chinese Studies, Astronomy, the Nam Center for Korean Studies, and the Center for Japanese Studies invite you to the Detroit Observatory, which is on campus here, despite the name, the Detroit Observatory tonight, this evening, September 17th, from 8 p.m. to 10:30 p.m. for a celebration of the Mid-Autumn Moon. If you don't have a ticket, we advertised tickets for this earlier and they went very quickly, but even if you don't have a ticket, you're still welcome to come and observe the moon through the outside telescopes on their patio, and families are very welcome. The Detroit Observatory is located at 1398 East Ann Street with an entrance on Observatory Street. And so for those of you who are familiar with the campus, if you think about where the cardiovascular center is, the Detroit Observatory is basically catty-corner to it. It's a big building with a big telescope on top. You can't miss it. This is the third year that LRCCS has sponsored this event, and it is always a wonderful opportunity to 赏月 and at the same time to learn more about the moon. So we hope to see you there. In addition, we invite you to attend the next presentation in the fall 2024 LRCCS Noon Lecture Series, which will be next Tuesday, September 24th. Yukun Zhen, LRCCS Postdoctoral Fellow, will be giving a talk entitled The Cultural Revolution in a Confucian School, Radical Conservative Movement of Grassroots Confucianism in Contemporary China. Yukun has done extensive field research on this topic, and it was his award-winning dissertation. We're delighted to hear him report on it. Now I am honored to introduce today's speaker, David Zweig, PhD in political science from the University of Michigan, 1983. David is Professor Emeritus at the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology, where for 15 years he directed the Center on China's Transnational Relations. He continues to be Distinguished Visiting Professor at the Taipei School of Economics and Political Science, National Tsinghua University, Taiwan, and also Vice President of the Center for China and Globalization, Beijing. So you can see that David has knocked off all the stops on the Greater China Tour. David Zweig has authored or edited 10 books, including Internationalizing China and China's Brain Drain to the US. In 2012, he briefed Li Yuanzhao, director of the Organization Department of the CCP, about why China's 1,000 Talents program was struggling. He was an expert witness in the defense of 2 Chinese professors under the China Initiative. His newest book, The War for Chinese Talent in America, The Politics of Technology and Knowledge in Sino-US Relations, came out this July 2024 in the Asia Short series of the Association of Asian Studies, published by Columbia University Press. A flyer for his new book is also available on the table as you came in. Please join me in welcoming David.
It's there. It's there. Yep. So it's terrific to be back. I haven't been back for a long time. The last time I was back was I was in Tiananmen Square when they opened fire. So I came back to talk about my experiences.
It's not exactly there.
Not loud enough? I don't want to hold it.
It's there now.
Yeah, that's because I'm holding it. How are we doing now? My shirt opens up. Do another button. Do up a button, I'll bet you it works. Stop showing off my hairy chest. Yes, how's that? Is that okay?
That's good.
Good, okay. So, yeah, so I was, the first time I've spoken lots of times here, I mean, even when I was a student, but the first time I spoke, I was Liu Xuesheng. I was a Chinese, a foreign student in China from 1974 to 1976 when Weida Lingxiu Mao Zhuxi was still alive. So the day I showed up to give a talk, Corner House, Lane Hall was just spilling over because I was the first person to have come from China. And then in '89, I spoke about my experiences in Tiananmen Square. So I think this is the next time I've been back, so it's been a long time. I mean, I'm more than willing to take questions after, but I'll try and get through this. That's not good. Okay, so I like to walk. So brain drain, big problem, right? Big problem for developing countries. It's actually a problem for OECD countries. I'm a Canadian, right? I'm a brain drain, right? But if you look at the data, basically China and India lose the most. I'll show you a table in a second. The Center for Strategic and Emerging Technologies, CSET at Georgetown, estimated a couple years ago that 90% of all Chinese with a PhD in AI were staying in America. So that's a huge loss. Here's the table, right? So here you can see China improved dramatically, but still, as of 2017, 83% of PhDs were still in 5 years after getting their PhD, were still in the United States. India, Europe not doing so well either, right? A lot of them coming here, and there I am, right? So, a problem. So what do countries do? Well, around the mid-1990s, some European specialists in science policy started to talk about the diaspora option, right? I hope everybody knows what the diaspora is. It's not a common term in Chinese, right? So the diaspora, Haiwai, right? It's the diaspora. And what you can do is you can persuade those people who stay abroad to help the country, right? In various ways. And I like the definition here, a series of policy initiatives by a sending state or its people, you know, to fortify, develop relationships with people in the diaspora. And there's an assumption, and this is very important for the Chinese experience, that there's a shared affinity, right? There's the assumption of that, because that's what, in fact, exists for the Chinese scholars who are in the United States. They have a shared affinity with China. The Chinese diaspora in the United States, there are 500. Last night, Anne told me there are 500 professors from the mainland teaching here, right? And if you Google, you know, any field, right, 3 of the top 10 for sure is from China, right? In almost every field, right? So that's amazing event group here, right? The National Science Foundation estimated that there were 100,000 mainland Chinese born in China who have a PhD who are in America. Now, they could have gotten their PhD in Europe, they could have gotten their PhD overseas, come here for a postdoc, but they're here, 100,000 people, right? And so for China, that's a nice group to be able to get information from. But one of the points is that when these guys were talking about the diaspora option, they never thought about the fact that maybe the countries that are hosting these people aren't so keen about these people transferring their knowledge back to a rising challenger, right? It's one thing to pass it back to Colombia, right, or to Venezuela, or, you know, to or even to Israel, right? But they never considered back in 1996 that passing it back to China could be a big problem. Now, China began to think about the diaspora back in 1994. The first policy was the Chinese Academy of Sciences had the 100 talents, Bai Ren Ji Hua, and it had a part-time option. And I mention the part-time option because from my perspective, the problem is the part-time option, not the full-time option. And I'll say it right up front, I have no problem. And America has no right to complain if a Chinese scholar or a Chinese student comes to America, studies, gets a PhD, learns a lot, and then of his own volition decides to go home and to exchange, bring back what he's learned. People do that all the time. This is an open society. This is an open world. People have the right to come and go like that. The problem is, from my perspective, is when someone's a part-timer and they're here and they're getting US government grants and they're creating new technologies or engaged in the creation of new technologies to then transfer that information back to China without going back full-time to China. That's where the problem arose. You may still think it's okay to do that. That's fine, but that's where the problem really arose. So all along, China had these strategies to get people to come back. And one of the big things was 回国服务, serve the nation without 回国服务, without returning to the nation. That's sort of China's concept of the diaspora option. There was a document passed in 2001, Jiang Zemin, and 7 different ways that Chinese who stay overseas can help. Using your professional associations. So if you belong to a business association in Silicon Valley, organize, get people together, get capital, whatever, and help, right? Concurrent positions in China and overseas. 科教教授, adjunct professors. Very common. Cooperative research, all of these things, right? Set up an enterprise, all of these things are ways that people could do it. Now, China really began to get organized. In 2003, the Communist Party declares that it is responsible for talent. It's not just responsible for talent within the party, but it is responsible for talent outside of the party. It's going to help promote Chinese talent. Once that starts, then all kinds of organizations, government ministries, if you know China well, you know that as soon as there's a policy, everybody wants to get on board because they want to get rain, right? They want the money to come down into their bureaucracy. They're very smart bureaucratically, right? So they do this. So all kinds of organizations, right? Here you've got HKUST, the Chinese Association for Science and Technology, works with the Ministry of Human Resources and Social Security. They organize a program called the Home Program. As of 2017, so I'm going to make sure I push the right thing. As of 2017, they had signed over 1,000 projects with Chinese abroad, and 21.4% of those had relocated to China, right? So here's China reaching out to these people and getting them to help. Fedesiak and Weinstein, who work at CSET, fairly anti-China guys, particularly Weinstein, less so Fedesiak. They did a good project, 208 Chinese professional associations, 21 countries. You can see the spread. And they found they were looking for our people transferring technology. That was their goal, right? So 61% had announced that they were involved in technology. The problem was they announced it in Chinese, but they didn't tell it in English. And that sort of raises the hairs for people on the right in America. Why aren't they doing that, right? And some associations brought new enterprises with their technology. It's their own technology. They brought those technology to high-tech parks in China, and China was encouraging them to do this. Now, there's another program called the 111 Project, started by SAFIA, which is the State Administration for Foreign Expert Affairs. I've worked with them in China. Their goal was to establish 100 innovation bases at China's top universities, gathering 1,000 overseas Chinese, so 110 per university, from the top 100 universities and research institutes in the world to come back to China to work 1 to 3 months. Fair enough, right? They threw, every one of those bases got something like $270,000. Where the problem comes is some of those universities are what are called the seven brothers or the seven sisters, I forget which, right? Guofang Keji Dashi, Beihang, right? These are all universities that have very close ties to the PLA. So as you listen to what's going on now in Congress, that's what they're talking about now, but this was already an issue much earlier on, and you can see what they're working on, right? So Harbin Engineering University established a base where Chinese from overseas were coming back and helping develop advanced ceramics. What's advanced ceramics? Advanced ceramics means if you put them underwater, you can hear American submarines off the coast of Hainan, right? That's what it, So that became a real problem. This book here, Hannes and Tatlow, this book, very, very tough on China. These two are very, very tough on China. Now, the most famous of the individual programs, as I always say jokingly, if that person's looking for me, I'm busy right now. I can't take the call, right? As Anne mentioned, this gentleman named Li Yuanchao moved up from Jiangsu province, very open-minded, really wanted to reform Chinese science and wanted to bring people back because he believed if you brought back people from overseas, they could get rid of the kind of personalistic, particularistic, non-egality sort of, not a really competitive distribution of grants within Chinese universities and research institutes. So he wanted to improve the culture of science. He believed once he became the head of the organization department, he had the power. He could fa dong chun zhong, right? He could mobilize the universities all over China and say, come on, guys, go get those guys overseas, get them to come back. And if they got them to come back, the universities would get awards, some of them quite big, right? So, it says offered millions. Senior faculty were responsible to go out and find their former students and bring them back, or their colleagues. And the two cases that I was an expert witness in, both of those people had joined the Thousand Talents program early on, 2011, when the Thousand Talents program in the United States was fine. Nobody cared. It's really not until 2015 that the FBI starts to get nervous about the Thousand Talents plan. But Li Yuanchao thought he could get people back full-time. He couldn't do it, right? We collected 501 of 1,500, the first 1,500 participants. We found 500 of them online. And no, I decided just to tell you rather than do the table. Among those, 26.5% returned full-time, 73.5% joined part-time. So they kept their jobs overseas and were transferring. They remained in their post overseas, but were helping helping China. Now, this table is very interesting. This shows basically China's efforts in a nutshell. These are all the programs. Most of them are full-time returnees, which, as I said, is fine. Some of them are part-time, right? The Changjiang Scholars Program, Changjiang Treasure part-time, Thousand Talents part-time. Now, I showed this. I was able to give a talk. I don't want to say what university hosted me last year. I gave a talk in Beijing in Chinese, showed this table to this group. It was a closed session, and a professor from one of the Chinese universities said, "Oh, 我现在明白为什么美国那么生气." Now I understand why the Americans got so angry, right? Because this is a real, big program, right? This is a really extensive program, right? So here's the Thousand Talents. I was able to go through, if you saw the footnotes, the footnotes like are 3 pages long of journals and magazines and going online to try and find all this. But this is basically how it got put together, that by 2018 there were about 8,000 people in the 1,000 Talents program. The United States Intelligence Services estimated that there were about 3,500 in the United States. So that's who they went after. They didn't care about the Chengzheng scholars. Not sure why, but one reason would be that the 1,000 Talents program was run by the Communist Party, which makes it much more worrisome, let us say. Okay? Now, how good are these people? Oh, how much are these people engaged with China? So you've got all these scholars, you've got these 3,000, you got 500 professors here. How engaged are they? So my research assistant, who's now a junior faculty member, he went out and collected, it's very easy, you use pinyin names, right? You can find scholars, Chinese scholars, you go on the website, you just look for pinyin. And so he found 121 top people, 18 American universities, 4 British universities, right? 43, so you're talking about 40%, 38%, something like that, had joined a national program part-time. So that's a lot. 35% held joint positions, 科交交show, right? Which I was a 科交交show, right, also. And then 6% were running labs. And Ann and I were talking about that last night. That, that may not be a problem. It could be a problem, right? Because if you have a lab in the United States and it's your lab and you reestablish that lab in China, you are essentially bringing everything that you know and the work to China. This is not so much collaborative. Collaborative labs is what we were talking about last night. Michigan probably has lots of collaborative labs, Chinese on one side, Americans on the other side, both putting in their money, working together. That's fine, right? So why do you join a program? And I mentioned the affinity issue, the whole, I'm sympathetic, right? I'm sympathetic that most of these people join programs because they wanted to help China. They had done their undergraduate in China. China had gotten their careers going. They had been overseas. You can read that stuff, right? You can see the quotes. They had been overseas. They wished that China could get stronger. They know the 100 years of humiliation. They want China to be stronger. Very, very simple, right? I believe that that's the major motivation. And here's some more quotes. No matter if one stays or returns, he can hardly get rid of his Chinese roots, right? All these. This was a very good paper that talked about a social basis binding overseas Chinese to China with which they share many characteristics. So naturally, right? In some ways, it's quite natural that this happened. But some people did it for their own personal advancement. You go back because to be a Chenren, to be 1,000 talents was a glorious thing. I remember once being in a room in Shenzhen, and I was walking with a guy, been talking to him, interviewing him. He had worked for 3M, had come back to China, set up his own company, and he was a Chenren, one of the entrepreneurs, and he would walk into the room and everybody would go, wow, 他是 Chenren. Right? He's 1,000 talents guy, right? Amazing. And then I got to meet I had all kinds of meals and all kinds of, but I always remember that moment when he walked into the room, right? And so I think that was really important. I also think on the biotech, I think that there's an incentive for some scientists to steal the technology or somehow maybe they were producer of some cancer drug, bring it back to China because they can get a very senior post in a hospital, because that's worth a lot of money. And it's worth mentioning, I'm very cognizant of the importance of collaborative research on cancer. China has 25% of all the cancer cases in the world. They have a real problem. They want to solve it. America is the #2 country in the world for cancer. The two countries need to solve it. And the United States and China agreed back in 2010 to solve it together. And they renewed a contract into an agreement in 2015. Very, very important. Yet, when you look at the people who are under attack, and I'll get to this in a second, in the United States, a very significant number of them are oncologists. And that's a disaster. So here's the jumping ahead, right? So Francis Collins goes off to Fudan and says, let's have this, right? Let's cancer research across borders. It's called, and the United States was into what was called Operation Moonshot. We were going to solve cancer. And both sides contributed a lot of money to it. So you're sitting there in the United States, 2011, you hear this agreement, you're an oncologist, what are you going to do? Well, you're going to link up with China. You're getting money, it's positive, it's everything good, right? The problem is when NIH decides to turn on these people in 2018, 7 years later, they're a big target of it. Now, they do things that they shouldn't do, but certainly not bad enough that they get fired. And I'll talk more about that. So the one place, maybe Otto and I will disagree on this, I think Xi Jinping created part of the problem, right? In 2015, at a meeting of the United Front Work Department, I've seen the documents, right? Xi declares the Chinese overseas scholars to be a focal point of United Front work. For those of you who don't know, the United Front is a department within the Communist Party, directly under the Central Committee, which from before the revolution was running around China, mobilizing intellectuals to work. It's non-party people working for China, but basically working for the CCP, right? So he makes this statement, and you've got to imagine that there are a lot of United Front Work Department people all over the United States trying to persuade scientists either to come back or share their technology. A study in France by a pretty critical of China organization goes into extensive work about United Front people going into French sort of research institutes of Chinese professional associations of Chinese scholars and trying to get them to transfer information back. Xi says in 2018, it doesn't matter that they come back, only that they act, right? So we want them to help us, right? He talks about offshore innovation in foreign countries. So if you set up some kind of enterprise, some kind of zone, there's a zone in San Diego, haven't been able to get there yet. There's a zone in San Diego where a lot of entrepreneurs, Chinese entrepreneurs, set up a factory, and then those factories or that zone has a link to a zone back in Guangzhou, and the people in Guangzhou are promising, we'll commercialize your product and we'll sell it for you. So that's been going on. Now, one other thing is that the Overseas Chinese Affairs Office, the Chaoban, nice guys, right? I worked with them, really easy, under the State Council, really, really nice people. And they're, very yo-how, very, very, very nice. They're not the United Front Work Department under the CCP. But the United Front Work Department has taken over the Overseas Affairs Office of China. And so if you meet someone in a consulate and they say to you, oh, I'm from the Overseas Affairs Office, they probably are from the United Front. So these are, I think China's partly, Otto and I were saying, who's responsible, America or China? And I think that's a good point. But I think China asked for it to a certain extent. That's why I show that big table. They went over the top. Nevertheless, the United States went way over the top, right? And many of my friends got in trouble. So the United States worried about the TTP, the Thousand Talents Plan. In 2015, they warned, I got a message warning us about the Thousand Talents Plan. But even the year before that, they had arrested Xi Xiaoxing, misunderstood his technology, thought he was transferring secret information to China. They kicked down his door, guns drawn. His kids are there, and the quote that comes out of that is, he yells to his wife, "Do whatever they tell you to do so they won't shoot me." Right? Nice, right? On a Sunday morning, right? Now, how did they find him? And we were talking again about this. So those of you who don't know, the United States, the FISA, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, has a thing called Section 702. Under that, the National Security Administration has the right and is able to get their hands on 1.8 billion emails a month. AT&T will send them. So we complain about China sharing their information. We're worried Huawei is going to share information about us to China. Well, AT&T is sharing information about Chinese to the American Intelligence Service, right? And they found Xu Shaoxing through that strategy, because what happens is the text goes from China to the United States. If it has any kind of reference to some kind of secret technology, bing, 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 bing goes off. FBI is notified, and they can investigate without a warrant. They can tap the phones without a warrant. They do not need a warrant to do this. And the head of the FBI, Wray, went to Congress just a little while ago and said, we have to have this. And all the Asian society, so many Asian organizations in this country tried to lobby them to at least reform it. And they refused. No reforms, passed the same way, right? Some of the context changes, right? Trump makes economic security national security. So if you're transferring some kind of commercial technology, maybe you're threatening the United States national security. In January 2018, the DoD, Department of Defense, declares China a strategic competitor, which, quote, seeks Indo-Pacific regional hegemony in the near term and the displacement of the United States to achieve global preeminence in the future. Is that true? We don't know. Right? China would deny that they want that they want to push the United States out of the eastern or sort of the western Pacific. Yes. The first island chain, they want the U.S. out of there. That's easy to make that point and to prove it, that that's their strategy. But global preeminence, we don't know. So it's all conjecture, but worries, right? So Ray, for me, the big period, really gets cooking really strongly in spring of 2018. And Ray goes to the Senate Foreign Intelligence Committee and uses some words that Xi Xiaoxing hates. I met him last week. I heard him give a talk. The word he hates is non-traditional collectors, right? In other words, you don't even know it that you're a spy, but you're a spy because you're collecting information for China. So therefore, you're a spy. And who are the spies? Professors, scientists, students, right? And that they're taking advantage of the open. And here the National Intelligence Council said that, so the number is 2,600 had joined the TPP as of 2018. And you can see most of them, significant number of them, are in medicine, life, or health sciences. Engineering, industrial technologies can be a worry in this. But in any case, in March, the FBI gives the National Institute of Health, their External Affairs Office, the names of 3,000 Chinese professors of interest. So the NIH decides it's got to investigate these people, right? They've been told by the FBI to investigate these people. So that starts, and there's all kinds of stuff. That's March, April, May, June, July, August. Finally, we get to November, and Jeff Sessions, the Attorney General, announces the China Initiative. What's the China Initiative looking for? Trade secret theft. It will find none. That's its target. Trade secret theft. And what's the deal? Who do you have to deal with? The non-traditional collectors. So it's even in the US government document, the non-traditional collectors. And administrators at US universities are educated in the art of detecting and reporting on their faculty. Isn't that lovely? Right? Isn't that lovely? We had a name for this back in the United States. It was called McCarthyism. Right? And NYU, which is one of the schools I'm really angry at, there was an article about NYU and McCarthyism, very active in the 30s in McCarthyism. And so I compare this both to McCarthyism and to a Maoist political campaign, right? A Yundong. Why? Top-down, external, internal threats, right? So there's internal threat. The outside's threatening us from the inside. That's also McCarthyism, right? Quotas for arrests. The FBI admitted, the deputy director of the Department of Justice admitted that he sent out messages to all of the 57 field offices and said, I want at least 1 or 2 people every year. So they gave them quotas. You have a quota, what do you do? In China, you have a quota. The quota used to be 5%. Chairman Mao always said that 5% of people are bad. That's a lot of people, right? So in every unit during the anti-rightist campaign, they had to find 5% of the people being bad, even if you weren't bad, right? Things you had done in the past all of a sudden become, which were okay, all of a sudden become criminalized, right? So you've been bad all along. The Chinese talk about guilty until proven innocent. They're benign acts of the past. I like this, right? So an FBI official saying, maybe next time an academic and institution thinks twice or thinks a little bit harder about their collaboration with the Chinese institution and what the motivations of the Chinese institution might be. This is exactly what the Chinese would call 杀鸡儆猴, right? Kill the chicken, scare the monkey. Right? You hang these guys up, you grab a couple of them, you hang them up, and you say to all the rest of the Chinese in the United States, if you do that, this is your future. Right? And this is Lelling. This is the guy who went after Chen Gang at MIT, who makes this. So when he has to justify why did he go after Chen Gang, who's completely innocent, he went after Chen Gang at MIT because he needed a chicken, right, to scare the monkeys. Mike German, who I got to know pretty well, wrote a book, ex-FBI agent, and I buy into what he said. The FBI may not have cared if they could convict people or not, because they drop so many cases. They lose so many cases. But the point is, he believes, the point was to disrupt the flow. They knew that there was this flow. I showed you this big table, right? They knew that there was this flow of US technology through various ways back to China, and the FBI and the US government decided, we're going to cut it. And how do you cut it? You make it almost impossible for a Chinese scholar in America to collaborate with a Chinese scholar in the United States. And how do you do that? Section 702 does it very nicely, right? You know that if you collaborate with someone in China, the FBI may kick your door in, even if you're innocent. Or they may start tapping your phone, or they may start going to the president of you or your university leaders and say, do you know that this guy is really doing this and this and this? You're innocent, but your career is screwed, right? And they screwed a lot of people's careers this way. I can tell you several people. The 2 cases that I was expert witness, both of those people, their careers were screwed. And they were relatively innocent. I'll show you in a second, right? And even with we were talking again with Ann last night, there's a very famous case called Anming Hu, or Hu Anming, right? Where Hu Anming was arrested, kicked out of University of Tennessee, lost his job, right? The FBI agent indirectly, is that okay, Ann? Can I say indirectly admitted he had made up the case. And he made up the case because he felt the pressure of the quotas, right? So, I can skip. So these are some of the bad stuff, right? The US government does a project, it's terrible. The Senate does a report, it's just a horrible report, I read it in detail. It's really BS, right? All kinds of holes you can poke in it. But they do mention, and this was a big problem, a peer reviewer at MD Anderson got some, they're doing reviews, peer reviews, and they photocopy the application and they send it to other Chinese and they say, hey, you should know what the cutting edge is being done, what people are doing. Don't tell anybody. That person left China, left the United States, right? And you'll see that they cut out peer review. Many mainland-born, China-born professors are no longer doing peer review for NIH. Oh, I like this. So I was at a meeting in Washington, and there's Ray standing there. I may run out of time, right? There's Ray standing. It's a good show. Ray's standing there, and he's pointing at this table, and he says, you can see we're opening a new case every 10 hours. What does it show? It shows an XY axis with a line going up. Does it tell you what the x-axis is? No. Does it tell you what the y-axis is? No. It's just a line going up. And he says, as you can see, we're opening a new case every 10 hours, which again is baloney. Now, NIH becomes the real nasty one in this. At least if you're arrested by the Department of Justice, it's public. It's on the DOJ website. Journalists can mobilize, and many journalists did to protect these people. Other colleagues can mobilize to protect them. The NIH worked to fire people secretly. The case that I did at NYU, the guy is not public. This book is the first time that his case has been made public. They put him on what I call the silent purge. They had a trial, 3 professors, none in the medical school. He was a world-class oncologist. They put him on trial. They decided to fire him. They didn't even call me to come and be a character witness or to explain how the 1,000 talents he joined in 2011, they didn't even want to know about it. The message was from NIH, you want to keep your NIH grants? Get rid of this guy. University of North Carolina was threatened to lose $1 billion in research funds if they didn't fire one particular professor. This school has fired people, right? It's all over the United States, right? Here's what they found. So Michael Lauer, very proud that he got 103 people fired. And this is really troubling. This is December 22. 57% of the cases are still open. So there's all these Chinese professors sitting out there who don't know if they're going to get into big trouble. For me, that's a terrible number, right? So here's the guy who got purged. You can read it in the book. It's a terrific book. No, you can read. But if you put in chat, buy it. Don't buy it from Google or from Amazon. Buy it from Columbia University Press, and if you put in the word chat you can get a 20% discount. I pushed them to do that. Anyway, he didn't do very much. My favorite, another case, Dr. Simon Ng. Guy's Malaysian Chinese. Can't even read Chinese, right? And someone wrote a document that applied for the 1,000 Talents program in his name, right? Saying that this Dr. Ng can do this and do that and do this and do that. He couldn't do any of that, right? The guy who wrote the report could do all of that, right? So what happens? So they charge Dr. Ng with 59 counts. Passport fraud. I haven't told you this, Anne. Passport fraud. Why does he have passport fraud? Because one of his passports says Ng. One of his passports says Wu, right? It's the same name, right? Just different, one's in Cantonese and one's in Mandarin, right? And they actually, I saw the document, they actually charged him for passport fraud because of that. So FBI really knows what they're doing, right? 59 felons, 58 of them dropped. What did they get him for? He lied to the FBI that he actually had patents in China. What were they patents for? Lamps. right, for some kind of lamps, because he was working with his brother who had a company, a factory in China, so they had to register the patent, but he lied to the FBI, a federal offense. He was given over a year in prison, right? He spent 8 months. I've spoken to him since he came out. He's quit. Dr. Huang, the guy before, he went back to China, right? So here's a $150 million oncologist gone from the United States, right? So lots of problems. I'll just skip because we're running out of time. One person who I interviewed who was terrific, Carol Lamb, she hates initiatives. And she says they undergo total oversight at the top of the system. They pressure cases to go to court. The DOJ was forced to dismiss or withdraw some cases prior to trial, or the judge just threw them out of court because the prosecutors, under enormous pressure to find criminal activity, had not done their research. Okay, so what does all this lead to? I can fly through this. Number of Chinese students coming to America, down. Right, there you can see. Number of foreign students coming to America recovered after COVID, but not Chinese. And the Indians, right, they go through the roof, right? So now everybody's going to want to hire Indian graduate students, right? Here's the estimate. Xie Yu, who used to teach here, who teaches at Princeton, he and his team did a big data study, and their finding is this is the number of people who change their affiliation. So you first published an article, you were at the University of Michigan. The next time they can find your article, you're at Tsinghua University. And so they count those as people moving. And I said to Xie Yu, I said, couldn't it be that they just didn't want to put it down? He said, no, we've checked, we're convinced these people have moved. So the United States is losing people. OECD did a study, right? Scientific, published scientists. Who's publishing? Well, not Chinese, not scientists in America, right? They're dropping. But the Chinese are picking up, and the OECD are picking up, partly because the Chinese are either going to the OECD countries or they're doing collaborative research with OECD countries, but not with Americans. So Susan Shirk, who wrote a blurb for the back of the book, uses a great term I like. She calls it, this is the tragedy of research commons, right? This is a tragedy. It's a tragedy from both sides, right? And what do we do about it? You know, the US Congress is continuing to be aggressive on this, right? That's a problem. They don't want to hear anything about this. They don't want to understand anything about this. They don't want to understand the whole process, right? Now, I mean, you can read this stuff, right? But there were no rules. And I've always thought, I went to the US consulate in New York, not to spy for them, but I went there to see the science officer, and I said, look, this was a couple of years ago. I said, let's get a track 2 agreement. And maybe the United States now, with China talking more, let's sit down, make a track 2 agreement and say what's acceptable, what's not acceptable. Who's going to get in trouble if they do what? But is China willing to back off on this? Hard to say, right? Is the United States willing to stop searching for these people? Unlikely. Right? That as long as this stuff's still going on, they're not going to stop, right? But I would say these scholars were pretty naive to think that they could do some of this stuff. Double grants, not reporting it. 2 jobs, not reporting it. What's his name? Peng Er at UST. I told Peng Er about this, and he said to me, serves them right. Right? This is a mainland professor at HKUST who's the vice president. He said, serves them right. They never should have thought they could get away with it, right? But the United States way overreacted, destroying people's lives, right? Turned it into a campaign to seat racism. I haven't gone into racism on this. Clearly, there's a lot of racism. We can talk about that, right? They targeted relatively innocent people, right? The NIH should never have gone after people doing cancer. Should have been bent over backwards to say, okay, rewrite your proposal. We'll give you the, slap you on the hand, right? This is all too important for us, right? And so one of the concepts is high walls, small fields. Find the serious tech thefts. Find the things that really are national security threat to the United States. Find the things that even are good, risky dual technology, right? Stop that if you want. You have a right to defend your national security. But you don't have the right to destroy people's lives when they're not doing anything to your national security. So, I would argue, as my friend from the FBI said, the United States has won in the short term. Chinese, and I want to ask more Chinese scholars about this. My guess is that people are not doing collaborative research across, too much with China. And that's what the United States wanted to stop, right? So the flow has slowed down. We know that. There's a recent study, Carol Wagner at Ohio State University, big data, shows that people who were engaged in research with mainland Chinese engaged with research with China, the number of papers published and getting NIH money has gone down. So the NIH has been successful in stopping this collaboration. I actually found that the Chinese are still applying to NIH, but not for collaborative research. But the collaborative research is dying, right? And given the fact that the United States and China were the #1 scientific collaborators in the world, way above everybody else, this collaboration was huge. As many papers as Europe combined, just about, right? That this is really here, the bilateral heightening of national security and its trumping of scientific and medical advancements may mean that we all lose in the long term. That's it. Questions? Someone's got a microphone. There's a mic back there. Also, I'd be glad to hear what people, good stories, stuff, information. Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you, Professor Zweig. So I have a question about this. Do you think both sides of the active, for example, like China's active or United States active, are only targeted on technology scholars or all scholars like humanities, social science?
It's primarily technology. China has made it very difficult to do social science research now for foreigners in China, right? I've done lots of surveys. For my book on the returnees, I've got about 12 surveys, many of them done with the Center for China on Globalization, right, which probably is a United Front organization. But I've worked with them, right, and they've helped me do surveys. We used to have, a lot of us used to be able to do surveys because there was a fellow in the political science department here who went to Beida. He had a PhD in political methodology. And he did surveys for me, he did surveys for Bruce Dixon at GW, he did surveys for Ian Johnson at Harvard. He was helping us all learn a lot. That stuff. It's already been a while. Under Jiang Zemin it already got tougher to do surveys. But you could still you had to toto momo, right? You had to sort of do it a little bit under the sort of, what is it called? Yes, Professor Dwoskin.
Thanks for really
I was worried about him asking questions. This guy knows so much
I have a
more.
really easy question for you.
Okay.
You mentioned the increase in Indian students, and I wonder if you have any thoughts on why, given the fact that the Indian diaspora is really not that different from the Chinese diaspora in the United States, in both, academic settings, commercial settings, and things of that sort. In fact, there are probably more Indians in senior executive positions in commercial companies than there are Chinese. Why does this happen to the Chinese diaspora and not the Indian diaspora? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Sure.
Especially if racism is a factor.
Well, first of all, India is a democracy. That would be my first answer. India is, Modi may not want it to stay a democracy, or it's becoming an illiberal democracy, meaning that what Fareed Zakaria once called the illiberal democracy. He wants to do that. I think that's one thing. Second is there's so much more Tomingdu. There's so much more openness. We went into Silicon Valley a couple years ago. I went in with an Indian friend of mine I was doing collaborative research with him. And we met with the people from TIE, right? The Indus Enterprise, the Indus, this is the world's largest Indian tech group, right? These are guys sitting in Silicon Valley. But what they would argue is that they're doing primarily is bringing Indians over and training them to be entrepreneurs and then helping them go back. That it's not so much them taking their own technology. It's also much harder. Doing business in India for these guys is terrible. They all say every time we go into the localities, the local Indian officials take one look at us and put out their hand. Whereas in China, there's corruption, but it's a kind of what we used to call in political science a market facilitating corruption rather than a system destroying corruption, right? It might have been more system destroying in the past. Now it's market facilitating. So it is somewhat different. It's democracy. They're much easier. When I went to Silicon Valley that year, I couldn't meet with a Chinese research entrepreneur. They wouldn't meet with me. But it was also because there was the Section 301. The U.S. Trade Representative Office was investigating China for its trade behavior, but I couldn't talk to them. And it's easier, they're just, I don't know. They're just, I think there's not a sense of racism. Americans are much more relaxed with Indians than they are with Chinese, I think, white Americans. Yes, question. Sure.
Thank you for a wonderful lecture. So my question is how PRC or CDP makes the cost and benefit, I would say, calculation on whether should this talent come back as a return migrate or just keep overseas in US and send knowledge or tech back. Because there's an idea in diaspora study called social remedies. That means those diaspora not just send remedies back, but also send knowledge and of course democracy ideas back. And it was somewhat challenges the CCP authoritarian governance in China. So I just wonder how they make this kind of decision on whether they should back or just keep here, and also will they do some kind of a loyalty test? I'm not quite sure.
Loyalty test.
Loyalty test.
Yeah. Okay, so good question. So let's go back to 1988. And in 1988, in 1987, 1988, the Communist Party discovered that people were really not coming back. This is even before Tiananmen. They discovered that people weren't coming back. So I was told that there was a meeting. And the meeting was the Overseas Affairs Office, the Chinese Science and Technology Commission, the Ministry of Education, Personnel Ministry, and Zhao Ziyang. And the Ministry of Personnel was afraid if too many people come back, we can't get them jobs, right? The Science and Technology Commission said, oh, leave them there. They'll learn technology, eventually it'll get back, right? Overseas Chinese Affairs Office said, leave them there, let them become citizens, they'll talk well about China, which is one of Xi Jinping's slogans. And the Ministry of Education, being quote unquote, I don't want to say, being the chickens that they are, right, were afraid that they'd get criticized because they were sending the students out and they couldn't bring them back. So they immediately wanted to end all exchanges. This is 1987, 1988. Zhao Ziyang said, storing brain power overseas. This is what we're going to do. We're going to leave them out there. Now, was there the big strategy that I think the science and technology people knew that eventually you leave people out there, they will eventually, the technology will find its way back, which is in fact what's happened. I think, one thing in terms of cost-benefit calculation is I think China really has to think about if they're going to lose now because they're not going to get the tech anymore. They've pushed too hard. That's why I say in part they're responsible. They pushed too hard. And putting the United Front people in the United States, you notice the FBI goes after the 1,000 Talents in 2015, which is the same time, I'd like to ask the FBI, same time that Xi Jinping says they're the target of our Tongjian work, right? So I think that he's gone overboard, and I think that he's lost the loop. I think that the United States has basically said, no more. You guys are not going to work together. It's a catastrophe in public health and all those things. It's terrible. But I think the United States government has basically said, nope. And that's in part China's own doing. Loyalty tests, it's always difficult to go back. It's always difficult to go back, I think. You want to make sure, so that's like why Westlake University, which is a university in Hangzhou, which is predominantly Haigui, almost all Haigui, that's where you want to go, right? You don't want to go into Renmin University. They'll eat you alive, right? I know a dean of social science and humanities at Renmin University, and his view was we should not teach statistics, because that's Western methodology, right? We must have Marxist political science only, right? And one of my former students is in that department that teaches statistics. And for a year, he refused to allow any course in the political science department in statistics. And then the Zhao Yubu said, bug off. We need to teach these people how to be good social scientists. But Renmin's a tough place. And I'm sure there are other places that are tough. There's all kinds of things that go on. One of the things now, if you go back, now if you want to get, the Chengjiang Scholars Program is often given to people who never went overseas, right? The Chengjiang more than 1,000 Talents, never went overseas. So they've got an incredible guanxi. They've been there the whole time. They've got their professors. They can get the Chengjiang Scholar Award easier than the people who are overseas, and when they come back, they can get promoted easier. So I have a student who can't get promoted. He is a full professor, but he wants to keep going up, and he can't get it because he doesn't have the guanxi. So that's a kind of loyalty test. Yes, Otto. So this is Otto Lin. This is Anne's father, and he's one of the most eminent specialists in developing technology in the world. He worked in Taiwan many years, and he was my vice president at UST, and we got along okay. Even though we've been arguing before, but we got along okay.
I think, first of all, I'd like to thank you for the talk, personally, because you are I heard many talks on this subject, but I think you were able to present a very balanced data and a very balanced point of view from both the Beijing point of view and Washington, D.C. Okay, so I think
that's my goal.
Yeah, I think this is a good topic.
It's always been my goal.
Yeah, very good.
Because I'm Canadian.
Yeah. Yeah, good. Well, I think there's a lot of food of thought here, okay, and we don't have time to discuss that. But on the subject is that I think you are page number 34.
Okay.
34.
I feel like I'm writing my doctoral thesis. Right? 34.
Yeah. Okay, the conclusions. I think the last point I'd like to make some comment that these scholars were deeply naive of risks they are taking. Okay, I think this all come back to a personal value judgment. Okay, I was born in China. Okay. When I was young, I was told that you have to have your value judgment. There's such a thing as 瓜田李下. You understand?
No.
瓜田李下.
Tian must be heaven.
No. 瓜田李下 meaning that when you are in the peach garden, you visit the peach garden, or you should never change your hat or remove your shoes, because people will suspect that you are stealing the peaches or the pear. Okay, it's called 瓜田李下. So a scholar has to be learned to behave himself. Okay, there's the so-called conflicts of interest. There are conflicts of commitment.
Right. Those are the COI, COC.
Yeah. I think these are the things that I think a lot of scholars, these scholars, they did not recognize that they have a responsibility to themselves to recognize that if I'm a professor at a university, can I also take a full-time job and take money from the other university, from China or anywhere? I think there's a matter of commitment.
Well, that's Peng Er.
Conflict.
That's why Peng Er said,
Yeah,
serves them right.
Yeah. So I think this are kind of thing that the scholar should really examine himself. Okay. Do you have time? Do you really have time to do this? Your full-time job here, and then you travel so many days, spend so much time in. How can you advise the student over there?
Let me just add.
Yeah.
But the American education system is 3 months a year. They had the right to go to China, and they were expected. It was allowed to go and get money and to get salaries. In their defense, that's
good. But I think this is the point that the university can help. University administrators should not, instead of try to point finger at people, should really tell the faculty members that, guys, you should learn about it. You should know about this. If you go there, to do this collaboration, there you can only take 3 months' pay, for example.
Right.
If you
UST
UST
did that.
UST did that.
Sent a guy with Guangzhou,
Yeah.
with Zhongshan Daxue. We had a faculty member who went and worked 3 months in Zhongshan Daxue, and we didn't pay him.
right. Yeah.
I
So
was
these are
talking
kind
about
of-
the 1,000 Talents
Yeah.
program to the school leadership. I said, you guys better pay attention to this. And so they struck a deal where Zhongshan University paid the person's salary and UST didn't pay the salary. That's okay.
Yeah. Another thing that you mentioned that, somebody mentioned India and China and so on. I suppose that India, if they do not recognize this, in a few years, India will be the next competitor to the United States, okay? So this is what happened. But let me tell you this, Taiwan, I have worked in Taiwan, and we have developed technologies such as IC chips, TSMC, you recognize that, and some of the other,
He was the director of E-Tree.
yeah, and some of the less sensitive, technology, but they are high tech, all right, okay. One of the reasons is that we have never intended to recruit people that can hold position at both places at the same time. If he can come back to Taiwan, that's good.
Yep.
And we try to help him to come back to Taiwan and make him, comfortable and can work effectively in that new environment. But I am never tried to, offer a job to somebody who works in IBM.
Right.
So you take my money. I work there for, and work for me for 3 months. This thing would never happen in Taiwan. So I think this is the kind of thing that you should learn the value, the personal value. You have to, think about this, and the organizational. You have to think about the culture. These are the culture that you should establish.
Thank you. There was.
So I think there are things that we can do there.
Yeah, there was an article I found in Chinese magazine called 知识分子. And in it, they interview, it's the intellectual, and they interview a lot of professors in China at the time of the China Initiative. And they said, well, what do you think? And these people said, these people are the people who are cheating, the Chinese expression, 过河撤侨, right? These people are crossing the bridge and crossing the river and blowing up the bridge, right? They're screwing us. We want to continue to have collaboration with the United States, but their strategies are going to make it impossible for us to continue to have this, which is in fact what they did. You know, and there's all kinds of stories. A professor at Ohio State University who still held his position at Ohio State and established a new school of pharmacology at Tianjin University.
So I think we should still tell the university here, you know, and in the United States that there are certain things that the university can help.
Absolutely.
Can help the faculty member.
Well, and they certainly should have given people the chance to rewrite their application, to say, okay, and you know, one of the things is NIH did not toughen up its rules until 2018, after they decided to go after these people. So the guidelines were not that clear. So one of the arguments from the Chinese scholars is the guidelines were just not that clear of what you did and didn't need to report. They still could have, as I agree with you. That's why I say naive. They should never have thought they could get away with it, and that they were, you know, destroying the bridge. Yes.
Fascinating talk.
Thank you.
When we're thinking
Say it
about
again. I'll feel even better. Go ahead.
thinking about the nature of this challenge, it seems like a lot of it is an issue of administrative tightening, a lot of it is competition, and then some of it is legality. And I'm trying to understand how much is one thing versus the other, and how much this challenge could have been solved by thinking about this as an issue of competition or an issue of administrative tightening, as opposed to the FBI legal approach, right? So, I'm trying to understand why was it turned into like a legal national security issue as opposed to treating it in that other way, and how much of this problem could have been solved by treating it in that other way, and why wasn't
90% of it could have been solved by treating it the other way, right? As I just said, when NIH went to a university and said, look, this guy is double dipping, NIH could have said, we're going to slap him on the wrist. He can't get any NIH money for a year or two, but he can still get NSF money. He can still get, DOD wanted to cut people off. I know of a case, that there just was this decision that they could have done things much better in terms of administrative, and they chose not to.
Was that a conscious decision?
Absolutely. I have another case. The guy's not even Chinese, right? He's a Moroccan Jew from France who teaches in the United States. He went to give a talk at Tsinghua. He came back from giving his talk at Tsinghua. They confiscated his computer. They closed down his lab because he had DOD money. They didn't tell him for a year what he had done wrong. And then they said, okay, it's over, you're okay. His lab was gone. So it's not just, part of it is just fear of the other, fear of the other side, fear of a rising China, a desire to maintain US scientific hegemony, right? A lot of it is that. DOJ could have done it very differently, And you want to jump in?
No, actually, all I was going to say is that that's a really great place to end. And
Oh.
thank you. Thank you very much, David. And I think we'd all like to thank you again.
Thanks.